Joining us now on the line from Washington, D.C., Jean-Francois Seznec. He is visiting professor at Georgetown University and a contributor to Foreign Policy magazine. And monsieur, enchanté de faire votre connaissance and welcome to our broadcast. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's very nice to be with you.
Let's talk about Bahrain before we get into the specifics of the troop movements from Saudi Arabia. Perhaps just some background, because I suspect a lot of our viewers won't know much about this place. Tiny place, many of us haven't heard of it before this week. But tell us, what kind of a country is it?
Well, it's a very small country. Only the north of the country is really habitable. It has some natural water springs. It used to be the Garden of Eden, a few thousand years ago. And of course, now it's mostly desert. It's a country that has very little oil. It does produce about 35,000 barrels of its own oil and gets another 100,000 from Saudi Arabia. The royal family, which controls the island with an iron fist, really has been in power since 1760 about, and has really controlled the island as feudal lords ever since. So the majority of the population is Shia. They're Shia of the same forms of Shiism as the Iranians and the Iraqis, but of course they're Arabs, not Iranians. Mm-hmm. And they are, very much feeling discriminated by the Al-Khalifas and a lot of the Sunnis there.
And what is it that they've been protesting, I gather, for about a month now, and what is it that they want?
Well, basically, they have a laundry list of what they would like, but basically they would like to have equality of citizenship relative to all the other citizens. I mean, for example, the largest employer on the island is really the military and the security forces, but there's not a single Shia in those forces. The military is actually Bahraini Sunni, and the police forces, which are just as big, are entirely composed or mostly composed of mercenaries from Pakistan and from Yemen and Syria.
And how has the royal family responded to all of those demands?
Well, the royal family is actually quite divided because you have some progressive members in the royal family, basically represented by the crown prince, who is in the late 30s, who is American educated and who has a lot of ideas and would like to include every citizen in the country for the development of Bahrain. He is, I think, in my view anyway, quite open to the whole concept of having a constitutional monarchy, with the royal family still having some power but very limited power, and a parliament freely elected, and therefore a prime minister that would come from there. And that's not at all what they have now, of course. On the other side, you have very conservative Sunni elements, which are really led by the prime minister, who is quite old, extremely wily, and extremely rich. He has made a lot of money controlling the economy of the country for 40 years now.
Let's talk about the military, because we discovered how important the loyalty of the military was in Tunisia and Egypt. Where do we suppose their loyalties lie in Bahrain?
Well, definitely the military is controlled by the Sunnis and controlled by the Al-Khalifas. The commander-in-chief of the military is the crown prince. The commander-in-chief of all the police and secret services and so on is the prime minister. Now, why did they bring only 1,000 troops from Saudi Arabia? Maybe it's probably much more now. We have seen some pictures of more Saudi troops coming in, but it's still relatively small compared to the local troops. I think it's because especially the prime minister was worried that the Sunni troops would be loyal to the crown prince, and the crown prince would like to negotiate with the opposition, and therefore the prime minister really sort of forced the hand of the crown prince and the Bahraini military, saying you're with us or you're against us. And now we have, unfortunately, because of these events of yesterday and today, the country is totally divided, and now the Al-Khalifas are united against the Shia.
Well, there is some suspicion, I guess, and you can tell me whether you believe this, that with the world very much focused on Japan and Libya because of the unfolding tragedies in those places, that the Saudis decided to, to get cute here, for lack of a better expression, and therefore a couple of days ago sent a couple of 1,000 at first troops along with the United Arab Emirates, across the King Fahd Causeway, and they entered Bahrain. And Toby Jones, who's at Rutgers University, put it this way. He said Saudi Arabia did not build a causeway to Bahrain just so Saudis could party on weekends. It was designed for moments like this, for keeping Bahrain under control. Now, what does under control mean, Jean-Francois?
Well, it means, I think the Saudis are very worried that the Bahrainis could have a constitutional monarchy. Because the Saudis are afraid of two things. One, they're afraid that with a constitutional monarchy and the rule of the majority, you'd have the Shia really in power, even though you'd have a figurehead king. Now, they're worried about that in many ways because they're afraid that the Iranians would take advantage of the situation and become extremely influential on the island through the government. I think there is another fear actually in Saudi Arabia, which I think Toby does not talk about that much, but I think the Saudis would be quite worried to have a constitutional monarchy in Bahrain because the Saudis would like to establish something similar. I mean, the Saudi royal family is relatively small for the 25 million Saudis. And many Saudis would like to have the royal family in Saudi Arabia surrender some of its power to much more democratic systems. And having the neighbors be happy, if you like, with a proper constitutional monarchy would put an enormous amount of pressure on the Al Saud family. And I think that's exactly what we're having here, is the combination of these two factors means that the Saudis felt very happy to go in at the request of the conservatives in Bahrain.
I guess I should ask you, Jean-Francois, what is your personal view of the advisability of the Saudis sending those troops in?
Well, I mean, and I'm on the record actually stating that I think it's worse than a crime. It's a mistake in many ways. I believe the Saudis, by doing this, prove two things. One is they really make the Shia opposition united, and they force the Shia, especially after killing so many people today, the Shia will view Iran as their only savior in the long run, and that gives an opening to Iran to start getting very much involved in the kingdom, really.
Do you think the Iranians were there already?
No, I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. I think and I've lived many years in Bahrain, and there's a fair amount of tension between the Iranian Shia and the Arab Shia. And there's no lost love between Iranians and Persians, whether they're Shia or Sunnis. And yeah, I mean, for sure there has been some influence of Iran. There's no doubt about that. But by and large, the Bahraini Shia view themselves as Bahrainis, not Iranians. And now all of a sudden, Iran has an opening, you know.
Let me, since you're in Washington, ask you about the American angle in this story, and that is, of course, this past weekend, the Defense Secretary Robert Gates visited Bahrain, and he had a meeting with members of the royal family in which he said, we don't want baby steps, we want real reforms. And then the next day, Saudi Arabia sends troops in. So why did the Saudis act so quickly on the heels of that American visit?
I think honestly, the Saudis really wanted to pass a message to Washington that Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, but mostly Saudi Arabia, is in charge in the region, and the American administration can mealy-mouth all they want about democracy and so on. The fact is that the Saudis are in charge, and they just wanted to make that point. And they view that they're the only ones who know how to act in the context of the Gulf. They're the only ones who can tell the population what to do and how to do it. And they view very poorly Secretary Gates visiting the Crown Prince and the King of Bahrain, but not the Prime Minister, and then basically pushing for a constitutional monarchy. That really got their goat. And I think the Prime Minister of Bahrain really took advantage of that situation, of this annoyance, to invite the Saudis in. And they did it with pleasure, in great part to make a point to the United States.
Well, the Americans and the Saudi royal family have had mostly, I think, good relations since going back to FDR, of course, all about oil. And I wonder whether you could characterize what you believe to be the state of that relationship now, in light of what you've just told us.
Well, it's not always been perfect. I think one must remember that the king in particular of Saudi Arabia is extremely opposed to American policy in Palestine. and has really put a lot of pressure on the U.S. to change its policies relative to Israel, and has failed systematically. There was also a lot of tension after the bomb, the 2001, September 11, and they had to swallow a lot of insults from the United States at that time, so they were not terribly happy. And so the king really, in many ways, supports the United States and like to buy arms from the United States because he trusts the power of the United States, the military power of the United States. But honestly, I don't think there is any great love lost between the Saudis and the United States. There is respect, but I think in this case, the U.S., they felt, crossed the line, and they had to make a point.
All right, in our last minute then, you've got a picture of one of the branches of government of the United States behind you, the Capitol Dome. There's not any chance that anybody in that building is listening to this interview right now, but if they were to be, or if people in the Obama administration were to be listening right now, what would you tell them about what the United States government ought to be doing with regard to Bahrain right now?
Well, I've been wondering that myself for quite a while, for the last few hours, because I really don't know what to say. The situation has become so tense and so difficult now that I'm not sure how we can get back. I think the policy which Gates and Secretary Gates and Hillary Clinton were following was excellent. I thought they were trying to push for a constitutional monarchy in Bahrain, but they pushed their luck a little too far, and they did not include the prime minister who was so opposed to it. So I don't know now how you can change this until we wait for a little bit and a few weeks to see how it will evolve. And I wish I had a solution or even a recommendation, and I feel very bad that I don't at this time.
Jean-Francois Seznec, it's good of you to join us on the line from Washington. Merci beaucoup. À la prochaine.
De rien, merci beaucoup. Au revoir.